So good morning, welcome to Stepping Up Kosher. This week we are going to be tackling an interesting topic, and it is the topic that in Hebrew is known as Ma'achale Goyim. Ma'achale Goyim means food of a non-Jew. Now I'll start off with a general introduction, and then we'll start getting into the details of it. Our rabbis prohibited that we should eat food from a non-Jew, and you'll notice I'm using a very ambiguous term. Food from a non-Jew, right? Baked by a non-Jew, cooked by a non-Jew, milked by a non-Jew, pickled by a non-Jew, dried out by a non-Jew. We're going to talk about all these different details. But the reason why we're not supposed to eat food from a non-Jew is for two reasons. Number one is because the sages wanted that a Jew should not get used to eating non-Jewish food, because when you're eating non-Jewish food, there's a good chance that there's going to be something in it that's not kosher. Or something involved in the process that's not kosher. Maybe it wasn't slaughtered properly. Maybe it's mixed with something that's milk. Maybe it's a meat dish, but it was cooked in a milk, right? All the different prohibitions that we know of that make up together kosher, you can avoid them by not eating non-Jewish food, right? So that's the first reason. The second reason is in order to avoid intermarriage. There's a reason why in today's day and age, if you say to someone, I took someone out for a date, it's almost synonymous with dinner. Sure, you can go for a date and go get a drink. You can go for a date and go this way, but there's a good chance that there's food or drink involved in it. Nobody say you can't go and play bowling and it's not a date. Of course, it's a date, right? But food and drink, there's something about food and drink that brings people closer together, and that's why our sages told us that we should avoid eating non-kosher food, non-Jewish food. Okay, so what is non-Jewish food? There are four categories. Category number one is going to be bread that was baked by a non-Jew, and I realize there's a lot of questions as to what exactly that means. We'll talk about it shortly. Category number two is going to be food that was cooked by a non-Jew. Category number three is a milk that was milked, even from a kosher animal, but without the oversight of a Jew. And number four is wine that a non-Jew touched. Okay?
Touched?
Yes.
They opened a Jewish one?
Yeah, we'll talk about it. It could even be looked at, by the way. Looked at, it could be opened it for him, etc. Okay. So these four categories, respectively, are called Pas Yisrael, which means bread of a Jew. Chalav Yisrael, which means, the order we said it in. Pas Yisrael is bread of a Jew. Bishul Yisrael is cooked by a Jew. Chalav Yisrael is milk of a Jew. And Yayin Nesach, which is the opposite, or Yayin Akum, which is wine of a non-Jew. Okay. So we're going to tackle these one at a time. I have a feeling we're not going to get to all four of them today. We're going to try and do at least two of them today. Maybe we'll get to all four today. We'll see. All right. This might be a two-part installment, or it might be all finished today. Let's start with the first one. Bread that was baked by a non-Jew. Okay. Different types of bread. It doesn't make a difference what type of bread it is, as long as it's from the 5 grains. Okay. Anybody remember the 5 grains? Ben Sion gave us an acronym. It is brows, like your eyebrows. Barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt. Those are the 5 grains. So any bread that's made from those 5 grains, which by the way, right away, if you have oat bread, if you have, right?
Sourdough.
Sourdough is made from wheat, usually, no? Yeah. It's usually made from wheat, I think. Yeah. But anything that's made from other types, or rice, there's rice bread. Cornbread, for sure, is very popular in South America, right? All of those are not going to be included in this. But anything made from the 5 grains, that obviously was turned into a dough, and then you bake that in the oven. It doesn't make a difference whether this is a bagel, a challah, a very respectable piece of bread, or a very cheapy piece of bread. It doesn't make a difference if it was baked by. And by the way, it also doesn't make a difference whether it's something that would be. We'll soon see that when it comes to cooking, there's a difference about whether it can go. It's fit for a king or not fit for a king. It doesn't make a difference when it comes to bread. It doesn't. None of these things make a difference. If the bread was baked by a non-Jew, then we're not allowed to eat it.
But wait a minute, could it have if it has a kosher symbol, you don't have to worry, or you're allowed to have it as a kosher symbol?
That is a contemporary modern question. We'll get to that in a moment. First, let's set down the basics. Then we'll get into what you can do when you go into a store and you buy it. Now, even if a non-Jew was involved a little bit in the making of this bread, so let's say, for example, the non-Jew, it was his wheat. Maybe he even put together the whole dough. So you're like, what are you even going to add already? The dough is made already, right? It doesn't make a difference. Even if a Jew was involved, if the non-Jew was the one who baked it, then a Jew is not allowed to eat it. So what are the leniencies? Or maybe the word is not leniencies. What are the things that a Jew would need to do? Or what can a Jew do? Right? You could have non-Jewish help in your house. what do you need to do to non-Jewish bread, so to speak, in order to make it Jewish, right? What part of the process do you need to do in order to make this bread that a Jew is allowed to eat? So the answer is one of three things. Number one is lighting the fire, most common one, right? Which, by the way, in most bakeries, there's not only, I'm sure you've been to kosher bakeries and you've seen non-Jewish workers, right? So they make sure that a Jew lights the fire, number one. Number two, and remember, these are either or. They don't have to be all of them. Or he can put the dough into the oven. So the fire could have been lit by a non-Jew, but if a Jew puts the dough into the oven, then that makes it Jewish bread. Now that might not be the best one to go with, because then obviously it's only the one that the Jew put in, and then 5 minutes later the non-Jew puts one in, and that one is considered non-Jewish bread, right? So that is the other thing you can do. Or the third option is to raise the temperature of the fire, to raise the heat of the fire. Okay, so let's say a non-Jew lit the fire, but a non-Jew raises the temperature of the fire, so then that also makes it allowed for him to eat any products that were baked, any bread products that were baked inside the oven during that time. Okay. So those are the three options. More than that, if you have a piece of bread, and this starts to get into what's if I forgot, right? If you have a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, was baked, it was made by a non-Jew. In other words, it was the ingredients were poured by a non-Jew. It was kneaded by a non-Jew. The fire was lit by a non-Jew, and it was put into the oven and baked fully by a non-Jew. But you go and then a Jew comes afterwards, right? Maybe in the middle of the baking process, or even at the end of the baking process. Even if already the outside of the bread is a little bit baked, but it's not ready to be eaten yet, and a Jew goes and raises the fire just a little bit, right? It can be from 350 to 400. Doesn't have to be, that much. Then that actually makes it allowed for a Jew to eat it. Now, this fire business, in other words, the fact that if a non-Jew turned on the fire, goes so extreme that even if a Jew lit the fire in the morning, and maybe this is a bakery, and all day they've been baking bread in this oven, over and over and over and over again, and the fire is still the fire that the Jew lit in the morning, and even if the non-Jew added things to the fire, obviously this is not going to be applicable to today, because today we have gas fires, right, or gas ovens. But back in the day, let's say where it was a fire, with wood and coals on the bottom, whatever it was, even the non-Jew was the one who was keeping it alive. In other words, from the Jew lit it in the morning, and it would have been out by now already. But the non-Jew kept putting in wood and kept the fire alive. It doesn't make a difference as long as the Jew lit the fire in the morning. It's good to go. Okay. So what is the criteria for that? As long as the fire didn't die down.
That's interesting.
As long as the fire didn't die down. This is the last caveat I just want to say, and then I'll open it for questions. As long as the fire didn't die down, which means as long as there were some sort of embers or coals on the bottom that were still lit, so then that's fine. But the moment that stops, and now the non-Jew relights it, even if it was still hot and it was still warm, it doesn't make a difference. There has to have at least been a little bit of fire in the embers that was still there from the Jew, and then he can re-fan it into a flame and it's fine. Yes? You want to ask a question?
No, I just want a summary.
You just want a summary?
Yeah.
This was a summary. So basically, bread that is baked by a non-Jew is not allowed. There are three ways that it can become allowed by a Jew being involved in the process. They are, number one, by the Jew lighting the fire, number two, by the Jew raising the fire, or number three, by the Jew putting the actual dough into the oven.
Oh, so if he didn't light the fire,
If a Jew wasn't involved in any of those,
he put it in the oven,
that also works. Yeah.
It's Jewish bread.
Mm-hmm. So you can come to a non-Jewish bakery and say to them, hey, obviously to make sure the ingredients are kosher, it's a separate issue. But let's say they have kosher bread, kosher ingredient dough. Maybe it's even made fully formed into a bread already, like it's all ready. And they're about to put it in the oven. You say, do me a favor, just mine, I want to stick in the oven. Let's say it's a boutique bakery, they let you do that. You just stick yours in the oven, you're good to go.
So what if the Jew didn't light the fire? Mm-hmm. Okay. But he did put the bread in the oven. What about the second batch of bread if it's put in by a non-Jew?
Then that's not kosher.
Okay.
If a Jew did not light the
He
fire.
has to either light the fire or put it
Or
in
raise the temperature.
oven, yeah.
Or put it in the oven, exactly.
Or raise it up.
Yes, you had a question. By the way, this applies not just to bread, this applies to any form of bread. So it could be pizza, it could be bagels, right? It could be, some pizza, I think a lot of people don't think of as bread, but it's the same concept. There's a dough to it. If something has a dough is a dough. Okay? Yes, Vicky, you had a question?
So you have to have a Jewish, you have an OU designation. This is a popular one to do. but it doesn't say Pas Israel. It just says OU.
Good morning, Michelle.
Is that still kosher, or what do they do to get that?
I know you want to talk about you want to talk about contemporary halacha. I want to do that right after the next paragraph, okay? Because there's one more paragraph, and then we're done with baking. Then we'll talk about the kosher certifications, and this one is going to be very crucial to this point.
Okay.
Okay. Because now we're going to talk about the leniencies. Everything we said now is the way a Jew should be operating. But then it's called b'shas adchak. I can't get any of the bread, right? So, according to Midas Chasidus, and this does not mean Chasidim as in the modern term Chasidim, this means anybody who wants to be pious. So this goes all the way back to the Talmud times. Anybody who wants to be pious, everything we said till now is what he should be keeping all the time. Okay? Why? You're eating Pas Yisrael, which means Jewish bread, as opposed to Pas Akum, bread of a non-Jew, of an idol worshiper. And that's the way to go. There is, however, a middle category. Okay? And that becomes very relevant to Vicky's question, which she keeps asking, which is modern contemporary bread. That middle category is Pas Palter. Pas Palter means bread from a bakery, a commercial bakery, non-Jewish bakery. Not a single Jew works there. Not a single mashgiach there even, maybe. Well, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's a commercial bakery, which means they're not sticking. You know what their standards are. You know what they're putting in. You know what the ingredients are. They're not starting to stick in other ingredients, right? So there are those, and by the way, this has to be specifically, first of all, not from the Jews, not from the non-Jews' home, personal home. Bread from a non-Jewish home is not allowed at all. From a non-Jewish bakery is different, okay? And now we'll add to that another thing, which is that the non-Jew is making it for resale. So that's when we call it pas palter, which means bakery bread, let's call it. Okay, non-Jewish bakery bread. What are the leniencies when it comes to this? When it comes to this, so then obviously you need to make sure that all ingredients are kosher, right? And you have to make sure that he was using it. He was using it in pots and pans and ovens that are not used for other non-kosher products, right? But your average commercial bakery today, they're not going to be using the oven for anything else, right? If the ingredients are kosher, you know the ingredients are kosher. So then it falls into this category called pas palter. And
why would they use kosher ingredients?
No, could be they do. We'll talk about it in a moment. What Vicky is saying is that maybe it has an OU on it. An OU does not mean that it's baked by a Jew. When you have an OU on it, it depends on the kosher certification agency. Okay, now is the time to address Vicky's question. Different certification agencies either will or will not certify for Pas Yisrael for that the bread was baked by a Jew. They will never certify, if it comes from a non-Jewish home, that he's making for his own.
Right.
They're not even in that business. But even if they were, they would never certify such a thing because that's definitely not allowed. But they will certify as an OU bread that comes from a bakery that is a non-kosher bakery. They're telling you, we are verifying that all the ingredients are kosher and that they don't use anything, the oven for anything else, which is a much simpler process to do. Right. But they're not certifying that it was baked by a Jew. Why? Because basically what they're certifying is that this bread is kosher pas palter bread, commercialized bakery bread, right? So now this type of bread, there are those that are lenient and say that you can eat it. Some people even say if there's a kosher bakery down the block, although obviously if someone is trying to keep Judaism properly, a pious one should not do that. They should get from the kosher bakery. And the reason they allow this is because sometimes the bread that you get from this bakery is better. I want to get the better bread that comes from the non-Jewish bakery down the block, right? Okay. So why do we say that this is like a leniency that you're allowed to do sometimes? Because a person who finds himself in a place where there's no other food, or what? Well, no, I don't think here counts.
No.
Yes, there is. What do you mean? If you walk into Ralph's, there are 6 different kosher Pas Yisrael breads that you can get. Absolutely.
Pas Yisrael?
Absolutely. These bagels.
I've never seen that.
These bagels come from Ralph's. They come from a company called Western Bagel. It has in it an OK, and under the OK it says Pas Yisrael.
Oh.
Now, where you're correct is that you can get better bread maybe in Pasadena, that better, like fresher or better bread, because there'll be a bakery here somewhere, but it still needs to have a kosher symbol on it, you understand?
Right, of course. But
if it has a kosher symbol on it, then it falls into the category of pas palter. Now, so if you're in a situation where you cannot get any other food, so then you can eat from this bakery. Okay. Now, that type of bread, in an ideal world, should not be used for a Shabbos meal. So that's the one caveat to this. That you really want to make sure not to use that bread for a Shabbos meal. Why? Because for a Shabbos meal, you want to have the best and most respectful bread possible. Ideally, a person should bake challah on their own in their own home. Okay.
But
even people.
bread,
What?
you can use Pas Israel.
Come again?
if you can't break, if you just don't have the capacity or the time or the energy to break bread at home, you should just use
Pas Yisrael. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. From a kosher bakery.
On Shabbos.
No. She's saying Pas Yisrael. You can go to a kosher bakery and get bread from them if you don't have the energy to make challah. Absolutely. But you shouldn't use Pas Palter, which is bread from a non-kosher commercial bakery.
Like
that has
just plain
efficiency.
OU without the pot.
You shouldn't use that, exactly. You shouldn't use that for, okay. Now, where am I going with all this? That even though it's a leniency and some people allow it, it should be understood that at times when we're trying to be a little bit more careful, we should use only Pas Yisrael. So for example, for Shabbos bread, like we said, and another time is during the 10 days of repentance. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, almost everybody is careful. You don't even eat even bread from a non-kosher commercial bakery. You shouldn't use that either.
What is Trader Joe's challah?
I don't know. I've never had Trader Joe's challah, but you can look at it to see.
And
Is it Pas Yisrael? Do you know?
No,
I don't know. It just as an OU?
I can't say for
I
sure.
think
Right.
it's OU, yeah.
But Shalom served it the other night. Shabbat.
Then I would imagine it's Pas Yisrael. If he's serving it, then I don't think he would serve something that's not Pas Yisrael. Okay, but that would be a question for him. All right,
So you?
he doesn't remember. So that is the laws of kosher baking in a nutshell. Any questions? Okay, we're going to move on to kosher cooking, which is a very different animal.
Yeah,
Yes.
Before we leave.
Yes. Before we leave.
Rabbi, before we leave this topic.
Right. Yeah. Got it. I
I
understand.
think Rabbi Hanoki told me once that you apply this also, Pas Israel, when I was buying pastries.
Yes.
for the-
Oh yeah.
It's
So I
not
mentioned
just
pizza.
bread, it's also the
It's
pastry.
anything baked. Anything baked that has in it from the five grains. Browse, like we said. So you want to talk about some examples?
Something like-
So some examples that we don't think about often are, okay, so bread you think about all the time. Maybe you don't think about pizza. Maybe you don't think about pastries. Let's talk even more than that. Pretzels. Pretzels are flour and it's really bread. Now I know it's not hamotzi bread because of the way that it's made, right? But pretzels is not a cooking question; it's a baking question. The same thing applies to pita chips. You often buy pita chips, right? So rose gold pretzels, for example, would be pas palter. Nobody's saying they're not kosher. Of course they're kosher, and not only that, you can eat them, right? But if you want to be appropriate for pas Yisrael, if you want to take on that extra stringency, or if you want to make sure during the 10 days of repentance, or for Shabbat, for your Shabbat dinner, you shouldn't use it for that. Like rose gold, I think has an OU, but it's not pas Yisrael. All right, so that was it. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Vicky, because we tend to think of pas Yisrael means Jewish bread, so you think of that as applying to bread, not applying to anything else.
And I knew it applied to pizza, but I was surprised when he told me it applies to
The
pastries.
pastries.
I hadn't thought of that those have to be Pas Israel.
Okay, so it gets a little bit nuanced because frying is not baking, and that's where things can kind of get a little. You're like on the edge there, but frying would still apply to Bishul Yisrael, which is our next topic. So we can use this as a segue.
Okay.
All right, next topic: Bishul Yisrael, the second of the four. Bishul Yisrael means that food needs to be cooked by a Jew, right? Same reason, same two reasons, because we don't want any non-kosher products in them, right? So you're not going to go to somebody's house and eat food that they cooked. They might tell you it's kosher, but they don't know all the nuances of kosher. As it is, even at this class, I think many of you have been surprised with different nuanced laws of kosher, right? So for sure, a non-Jew who doesn't even care that much about kosher, even if he's trying to be respectful to you, maybe he doesn't know that you're not allowed to cook in a non-kosher pot, for example. Maybe he doesn't know that you need to check your lettuce for bugs, right? So you can't exactly do that, huh?
I'm sure they don't know that.
Absolutely, exactly. So that's the first reason for the stringency of Bishul Yisrael, of making sure that your food is cooked by a Jew.
Bissell?
Bishul Yisrael, which is the second category here, cooked by a Jew. Bishul, B-I-S-H-U-L. And the second reason, again, is to avoid intermarriage. Okay. So what is involved in cooked? Okay. There are four things that go into the category of cooked. And then I'll mention some of them that don't fall into that category, which are allowed to eat, which is really cool. Okay? So what are the four things that are prohibited with regards to cooking of a non-Jew? Number one is cooking, obviously, typical, right? In water, boiling in water. Number two is frying. Okay, number three is deep frying. I'm sorry. Number two is roasting. Number three is frying and deep frying. And the last one is baking. Okay, now you're thinking, hold on, we did baking already. Yeah, but that baking only applied to bread, or whatever. What is halachically considered bread? The five grains of bread. But what's if I go to the store and I want to buy baked potato chips, for example, that are not baked by a Jew, right? That are baked by a non-Jew. What do I do then? So it falls into this category of cooking of a non-Jew. So from now on, for the purpose of today's conversation, when we talk about cooking, we mean all four of these categories. Cooking as in boiling, cooking as in roasting, cooking as in frying or deep frying, and cooking as in baking. Okay, all of those fall into the category of cooking.
Does that include microwave?
Hold that thought. But other forms of cooking. Can anybody think of other forms of cooking besides the four that I mentioned?
Barbecuing?
Braising is basically roasting, no?
What is
Or baking?
barbecuing? Is that roasting?
Barbecuing is roasting, yeah.
It's like more like poaching.
What is braising? What is the process?
Well, I guess poaching. What about poaching?
What is
fish?
poaching?
Poaching is putting fish in a little bit of water.
So that's typical
Boiling.
cooking. That's boiling. Yeah, it's the same thing as boiling. But what about pickling? Right? It's an interesting thing. You can cook food by pickling it. For example, you can buy pickled fish. Right? Totally allowed. That's not considered cooking for the purposes of this conversation.
There's no fire. It's just
From a halachic perspective, in other halachic areas, it is considered cooking, yes. But for this purpose, it's not considered cooking.
Oh.
So pickled fish, pickles, period, right? Any pickled vegetables, pickled cucumbers, pickled anything, right? And the same thing for drying, which is another process, right? Dried fruit, dried
Dried
right?
meat.
Dried meat. Well, dried meat you get into all sorts of other issues. It needs to be kosher meat. It needs to be but it does not need to be dried by a Jew. Correct. That dried meat would not need to be dried by a Jew. Dried meat is not cooked first. It's not cooked and then dried. I don't know the first thing. You're talking about like biltong and stuff like that, right?
I never eat it.
Okay.
I see it.
I don't know enough about the process.
I've never seen poaching.
But drying is not something that would need to be done by a Jew. Drying, pickling, these sorts of things.
Is that why that certain flowers and stuff? When there was COVID, they came out with certain lists of things that if you can't get kosher are okay.
It's probably these kind of things, yeah.
Because they said, it's not desirable.
It's probably
but
things. It's probably much more. It's probably things like paspalter, which is what we discussed at the beginning of the class, like bread that comes from a commercial non-Jewish bakery. I want to add one more thing here. Another thing that's not considered cooking for this purpose, is instant cooking. So let's say you have an instant soup, or you have an instant oatmeal. If a non-Jew pours the boiling hot water, even if he boiled the boiling hot water, that type of cooking does not need to be done by a Jew.
So if you're having one of those little ramen noodles,
Exactly.
as long as it's a kosher.
Obviously, the ingredients still need to be kosher. This is not a discussion about ingredients. This is just a discussion about the
But
process.
your friend, who's your roommate,
Right.
pours the hot water.
Exactly. Very good. Good practical example of it.
Okay.
So that would be allowed. Now, Vicky asked about microwaves. I'm not sure if you meant cooking in a microwave. I don't know exactly how you cook in a microwave. I don't know if you can. But definitely, one second. But definitely, reheating food by a non-Jew is allowed, even if not in a microwave, even in an oven. Non-Jew in his oven reheating the food, that's fine. Anybody know where that applies?
Well, people do that in
You're
hotel
at a
rooms
kosher
too.
Hotel rooms?
restaurant.
Where else?
At a kosher restaurant, you want your food hotter?
Yeah, but a kosher restaurant, everything's going to be kosher, and it's going to be Jews doing it. But what about on an airplane? Right? Or what about any kosher meal in a non-kosher environment? Let's say you go to a big dinner. Some dinner, they're honoring somebody, whatever it is.
Oh yeah, and you're asking that it be.
And
And they
you
bring a
and you
double
order a
wrap.
kosher meal, and it comes from Pat's. We'll talk about the double wrapping in just a second. And let's say it comes from Pat's, which I think in greater Los Angeles area, if you go, for example, I once went here to a Pasadena police department, something dinner or whatever it was, right? And I would never go to a dinner unless there was kosher food served. Even if I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to sit at a dinner unless it's clear that I'm being served a kosher meal, because then somebody might think that the food is kosher, right? That's as a rabbi, that's an extra stringency that I have. So I ordered a kosher meal, came from Pat's in the city, and then they reheated it for me. It doesn't need to be a Jew that reheats the food, because the food was cooked already. Okay, now, you do run into a different issue, which is what Vicky mentioned, which is it still needs to be kosher products. So obviously all the products inside need to be kosher, and also it needs to be cooked in a kosher environment. Remember, we always say that if the walls of the oven absorb some sort of non-kosher taste, and now that non-kosher taste is going to be let out into your food, so then you're going to have that same issue again. Right? Why? Because it's going to be a non-kosher ingredient that's inside your food. Double wrapping it avoids that.
And that's why
Same thing with the
people
microwave,
eat them.
but double wrapping it avoids that. So, for example, if you bring your kosher food with you on vacation, you let's say maybe even you freeze your food. You make yourself for the first night of vacation, get on meatballs and spaghetti. For the second night of it, and you freeze them in little portion dishes and like Tupperwares or something. And then you go to your hotel and you want to put it in the microwave. Double wrap it with, well, not with foil because that's not a good idea for a microwave, but double wrap it with something. Then you can heat it up in the microwave, and then we say that. I don't want to get into all these details because we're going to talk about it later, but you end up with a rule called nat bar nat, which means that the taste is going from the wall of the microwave into the wall of your first wrapping, then it has to go out of the wall of your first wrapping into the second, then into the second wrapping into your food, and at that point, that's considered no sentam bar no sentam, or nat bar nat, and therefore that taste is not an issue. I don't want to get into too many details about that.
True in ovens too?
Yes, that is true about non-kosher ovens as well.
So if
Double
you go into
wrap.
a non-kosher person's home, that's the way.
That's the way to do
Bring
it, yes,
your own
exactly.
Food, you
Double
gotta
wrap it in foil or something.
Foil for an oven and
Exactly.
and plastic
For a microwave or whatever.
Because we have that
I don't really
in our
use
family,
microwaves.
and I've seen my Orthodox cousin do that. He brings it.
That's
like
the
that,
ideal.
His own food.
His own food, so he knows the ingredients are kosher.
Or he bought it from a kosher
exactly, or maybe he
restaurant.
bought it from a takeout place, but now he
Right.
wants to heat it up, and he's staying in someone who's not kosher. Or an Airbnb is another perfect example of
Right,
this.
or hotel.
Right?
Right.
No, but I'm saying an Airbnb usually have like a whole kitchen. But
Right.
to a kosher Jew, that's pretty much useless until,
Right.
So this is one of the workarounds. Okay. So just like we had ways that a Jew can get involved in the baking process, and that makes it kosher Jewish bread, there can be ways that a Jew can get involved in the cooking process that makes it kosher, makes it cooked by a Jew. Okay, what is that? So a few things. Actually, he wants to start with something else. Let's say you have a non-Jew who's cooking in your house. Help, for example, right?
Caregivers. We've
Or
had that with
caregivers.
Yeah.
Or you have one of these fancy services where a chef comes to your house. You know these examples, right? So then, first of all, there needs to be a Jew present. The Jew that is present needs to be what we call yotzev v'nichnas, which means he needs to be going in and out all the time, so that the non-Jew doesn't know when to expect the Jew. Why? Because otherwise, in such a situation, you can assume that he's going to act based on Jewish oversight. That there's somebody so there's some sort of accountability, right? And then you would be allowed to eat the food as long as the Jew was involved in some process. What are the processes? Number one, either the Jew takes the food and puts it on the fire. If the fire was lit by a non-Jew, the Jew has to actually take the pot and put it on the fire. Or more commonly, the Jew will light the fire. Okay, so those are the two ways.
Marty's caregiver, I mean, she
Okay.
lit the fire. She had kosher food.
Okay, so live and learn. That's what this is.
But it wouldn't be
I couldn't
okay.
have been there.
I understand. Oh, you're saying what would have been a solution? You're saying
Yeah.
you can leave a tiny fire on. That's what a lot of people do.
Or if you put in the food.
Yeah, but she's saying she wasn't always there. But
Right.
you can leave a fire
I
on, a
was saying
tiny
to
little
you,
fire on in the corner
like
of your
when I was
oven.
sick, I couldn't get out of the bed. So what do I do if there's just me
By the way,
and caregivers?
another option is that you can have cooked the food, or the food can have come from somewhere where it's already cooked, and then they're just reheating it. It's fine.
Oh, it's okay. If you,
Yeah.
Oh, do back the microwave, double
Exactly.
wrap.
Same thing,
That
yeah.
can be done by a non-Jew.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What about something like, breakfast, frying eggs or something like that? The fire would have to be on
By a Jew. Yeah. I don't see any other way that works.
Yeah, we messed up both of us. We
It's fine. It's okay. That's why we're here to learn, to learn, to grow. So now another thing, by the way, is
caregivers is
another
really
thing to
fun.
keep in mind is that all of this only works in a Jewish home.
Fire or
In
put on.
or be the one to put it on. Another
Just
thing,
like with the baking.
yes, by the baking we also had raising the fire. Yeah, I'm not. I think that works here too.
But we don't have raising the fire.
He didn't say it here, but oh no, see, he's about to say it. It doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, it does. Raising or lowering the fire or taking the pot off the fire, that's not enough. Taking the pot off the fire and putting it back, that's not enough. You have to either be the one who puts it to begin with, or you have to turn on the fire. I want to just make sure to say something because nobody mentioned this case, but we're getting very awfully close to it. This is all true only in a kosher home, right? In a non-kosher home, so let's say, for example, if your husband, Marilyn, had not been in your home, but had been in a senior home, in a home where they were caring for him, so then that would be a whole different story. These things wouldn't help because there would need to be a Jew that would actually be involved in the process.
I had that
It's a
with
much
my
different
mother.
story,
I did
because
the
you're worried
double
about
wrapping
ingredients,
in the
you're-
microwave, though.
No, that's fine.
I made the food, I brought it,
Yeah.
and then wrapped it and heated it in their microwave. They didn't want me to, but I explained that's the only way I could eat it,
Mm-hmm.
and so they allowed me to put it in the microwave and heat it.
Okay.
And then I could eat hot food once in a while.
Okay. Let's talk about the two big leniencies.
You knew that.
The double wrapping I knew, but I didn't know that a non-Jew couldn't turn on the
Right.
microwave. I didn't know I had. As it happened, I had to do it because
I understand, yeah. Let's move along because I do want to try to finish by, it's 10:30 already, but I want to try to finish at least by 10:35, 10:40. Let's talk about two major leniencies there are when it comes to cooking. Okay? Number one is that cooking of a non-Jew is only a problem if he's actually cooking something that was raw beforehand. In other words, it was inedible beforehand. Examples are chicken, meat, eggs, even though some people swallow raw eggs, and even though some people will eat raw meat, focaccia, carpaccio, whatever it's called, right? Raw. But if it's something that's normally not eaten raw, then he's cooking it and he's changed it now into a cooked dish. That's where there's an issue. What are the other things where it's fine? Vegetables, for example. If a non-Jew cooked vegetables, but the vegetables are totally edible raw, or fruits, but the fruits are totally edible raw, so let's say, for example, mashed potatoes, then that's allowed. Okay?
Mashed potatoes are edible raw.
Oh no, sorry, why am I saying mashed potatoes? Mashed potatoes are not edible raw. Nobody eats potatoes raw. So let's take another example.
Unless you're
Well, your fruits are that way, and cucumbers,
Yeah.
tomatoes are a good example. Some people cook
Yeah,
them.
a shakshuka. They're using
Yeah.
the tomato, which people will eat raw, tomatoes.
Right.
Then you put it in a shakshuka. Yeah, thank you for an example. I blanked. Couldn't think of an example, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's-
Anything that you would be able to eat raw and now happens to be cooked, that the
Well,
bishul Yisrael is
zucchini
not
is the
possible.
same way. Some people eat zucchini raw.
Really?
You can,
Okay.
In a salad. Oh yeah.
So, by the way, this is one of the areas where it starts to you'll look at, as you start looking at the modern contemporary books, there will be variances, because some people are like, no, it's not normal to eat zucchini raw, and some people are like, what do you mean? I know people eat zucchini raw, right? So, yeah, but most things, for 95% of things, I think there's going to be a consensus of what's eaten raw, what's not eaten raw. Like I know, for example, about fish. I've heard people have a conversation about fish. Because fish, there's sushi, but sushi is not a regular way of eating. It's definitely it's a unique type way of eating, right? No, people don't usually just go and take a salmon and just eat raw salmon out of a salmon, right? Okay, when it's clean and this, whatever, so there's a discussion about that.
has to be special sushi.
What?
Has to be special sushi treated salmon. It
Right.
has to be treated in a
Yeah. Tuna, for example, I know is a big discussion. Tuna is a big discussion.
in a can.
Tuna in a can,
Well, you
is
might
cooked.
make it
Is
into
cooked.
a-
And most
into a-
people will say that tuna in a can needs to be bishul Yisrael, but I have heard of those that say that it's not allowed, and these are their reasons. They say there's two things.
But it is allowed.
There are some people that say that it is allowed
Yeah.
to eat tuna without it being bishul Yisrael, and we're going to talk about those two reasons. The second reason is coming up right now, but the first reason would be because technically people eat tuna raw. They don't eat tuna from a can raw. So that's where that whole discussion comes in. Let's talk about the second one. Okay, the second one is like this. It has to be food that is appropriate for a king's table. Ola al shulchan malach, you would find it on a king's table. Okay? So, cooked dishes that a non-Jew cooked, but they're not very respectful foods. They're not very, what's the word I'm looking for? Elevated foods, right? So they would not be found on a kingly, stately table, right? Of respectable people. You're allowed to eat them even if they're cooked by a non-Jew. So it turns out, what?
I don't know what that would be.
Okay, so he's gonna give you some examples right now.
What about it?
So it turns out that it's prohibited to eat potatoes, mushrooms, rice, etc. Why? Because they would typically be found in dishes on a king's table. So if a non-Jew cooks them, you're not allowed to eat them, right? They would not be edible raw. Most people don't eat raw mushrooms. They don't eat raw potatoes. They don't eat raw
they don't
rice.
eat raw
Raw mushrooms they do, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I love
All right. But they go on. They would be appropriate for a king's table. So it doesn't make a difference if they took them and they made them in a new form or not. Okay. So for example, you take potatoes and now you make them with potato chips, right? So then they would need to be cooked by a Jew, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But
potato chips are not for king's table.
let's talk about potato chips in just a moment. But let's talk about some things that are obviously not for a king's table.
Okay.
Falafel, for example, sardines, things like this, which everybody agrees this is like street food. This is not food that goes on a king's table, on a stately table. Those you're allowed to eat them even if they're cooked by a non-Jew. The only thing is, obviously, you have to make sure that they were A, only kosher ingredients were used, and B, you have to make sure that obviously it was cooked in pots that are not exuding a non-kosher taste into them. Okay, the big exception to this is what he's about to say here is the big exception is canned goods, such as, for example, canned tuna, which are considered food that would be on a king's table. They need to be Bishul Yisrael. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. There is a big discussion, and I believe if we want a consensus, okay, we'll talk about a consensus in a moment. But there's a big discussion about whether this criteria of being food that's olal shulchan malachim that would be found on a kingly or a stately table. There's a big discussion about whether that has to be for the product that you're eating, or whether it's talking about the product that you're eating, whatever it's made out of. So, for example, potatoes, we can all agree, would be found on a king's table. Right. You can make lots of wonderful, very, very nuanced delicacies, sophisticated delicacies that would definitely be on a king's table. But potato chips, I think we can all argue, most likely wouldn't be on a king's table, right?
I like them.
What? You like them? Okay. I'm not calling you not a queen. You're still a queen. By the way, again, we're not even saying that the king wouldn't eat them. The discussion here is that it's not respectful. It wouldn't be Now, why does this become a discussion? Because potato chips are found all the time with an OU on them.
Yeah, and
right?
I eat them all the time.
And personally, I eat them. There are many that have the stringency not to eat them. By the way, just to clarify, we're not talking about corn chips. Because corn, according to all opinions, would not be found on a king's table.
Oh. So
But potato chips, corn chips is totally fine. Without Bishul Yisrael, yes. Just a regular OU.
That's fine.
Yes.
The corn chips.
But let's talk about potato chips. There are many that are stringent when it comes to potato chips. And they will say because potatoes itself would be found on a king's table. Right? So, and obviously potatoes are not eaten raw. So therefore, you're not allowed to eat potato chips unless they were cooked by a Jew.
Okay, so if they have an OU
There isn't a full
on
consensus about them.
then you can't.
Personally, I do eat them. I do eat potato chips with an OU. That's how I grew up in my home.
Right.
But many people are strict about it, and they will only eat kosher brand, which means that it was cooked by a Jew, potato chips. Yeah. And it's for this reason. Okay, one last thing, which is drinking coffee or any other sort of drink, a hot drink that was prepared by a Jew. It's allowed. You're allowed to drink beer that a non-Jew prepared, and the reason for this is because most any drink that most of the drink, 90% of it, or whatever it is water, right? That's fine. So the same thing, a coffee or a tea, you're allowed to drink it if a non-Jew prepares it.
Does it have
So
a texture on it?
it has to be made from kosher ingredients. Does it have to have a hechsher on it or not? I think that depends who you ask. Some people will be careful that it should have a kosher symbol on it. Some people will say no. They're telling you it's black coffee, and I'm fine. I'm good to go. Obviously, coffee, as we know, today's day and age, could be flavored. So it could be an issue, and many people will be strict to make sure either it's from a kosher establishment or that. Yeah.
Or they ask that it's.
These are definitely the gray areas that even amongst religious Jews you will find differences in how they act. Some people I know will not drink a black coffee on an airplane, for example, right? They come walking around. What are they putting in already, right? It's just black coffee, right? So you can take a black, it's prepared by a non-Jew, what could be wrong with it, right? And they pour you a black coffee. So some people will drink it. Other people will say no, unless it's from a kosher establishment, I won't drink it.
Some people also will drink it only in a paper cup because they're concerned about the.
Well, that's almost across the board. And it's not really today's discussion, but we should address it, which is that when it comes to a non-paper cup, first of all, it has to be immersed in the mikveh, right? Okay.
So you're on an airplane, I'm saying.
So
and
on an airplane, usually they give you paper.
No. If you're in business class or
Right.
upgraded, or
So you can ask for a paper cup. Now, the other issue with a non-paper cup is that there could have been other products besides for coffee in your cup in the past that would have been absorbed into the wall. For example, milk.
Right.
The person before you might have ordered coffee and then put milk inside it, or they could have been, I don't know, maybe they decided you just use that glass for a ramen
Or
soup.
that have flavored.
Right, or coffee with a flavor, exactly. Whatever it is. So that's why you have to be careful not to. Yeah, you should use a paper cup.
The reason I said that they asked me on the airplane, do I want a paper cup? Because I order a
kosher
strictly
meal, right.
Mandarin kosher meal.
Right.
So when they see that, they say, do you want a paper cup with your coffee? And I wondered why they asked that, but now I get why they're asking.
I don't understand.
It should definitely
What
be in a
about
one-time
plastic,
use cup.
though? What about-
Plastic is the same thing. We're just talking about one-time use.
Oh, one time.
But yeah,
Okay.
paper cup was the wrong term to use. A one-time use cup,
Yeah,
a disposable cup, which means it's your cup and you
Yeah,
control
of
what's
course,
happening with it,
of course.
as opposed to using some. Yeah, she's right though. When you travel business class, then they'll bring you a mug or something, and then that is an issue. Yeah, absolutely.
Ceramic, they'll bring you.
Okay, but I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying. This is one of those areas where if you're trying to be more pious, avoiding black coffee on an airplane, it's not without basis. There's what to avoid. And that is something to be done.
Does sugar have to be kosher too?
Sugar has to be kosher, yeah. Yeah, sugar needs to be kosher. But that's easy. That should be easy.
If
It
you're an
usually
LL,
comes with like
kosher, that's
LL is
okay.
different, yeah. But we're not always trying to as well. But very often you get a sugar packet. The sugar packet has an OU on it or something like that. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
but like when I go to the store, I don't really check for hexagon on sugar.
You're most likely buying things with a hechsher, but it's a good idea to double check. Okay.
You know, there's a lot of vegan now. They don't put a hexagon on it, but I noticed that Trader Joe's is
Right.
vegan.
Last week we discussed that one of the big
I know.
issues with vegan could be
I
bugs.
know.
So in general, you shouldn't be eating things without a hechsher because in today's day and age, a lot of things.
Even if it's
Anyways,
vegan.
let's wrap up today's conversation here, both because we reached a good stopping point, because now next week we're going to do milk and wine of a non-Jew, and also because my alarm clock is ringing. So thank you all for joining us for Stepping Up Kosher for this week. Looking forward to seeing you next week as we continue with the laws of food of a non-Jew.